Hey everyone, it's Hannah and Jenny with 4AR People, and we're back.
Hi.
We're back again to talk about Learns, and a new lawsuit.
The gift that
So,
keeps on giving.
right. So, why is there a lawsuit filed against Learns? Well, it's pretty simple. Our legislature did not follow typical protocol, something that they should all be well aware of. So Learns has something called an emergency clause, which means once it's passed, it goes into effect. Those have to be voted on separately. The legislature did not do that. And so now there's a question of, can we implement this? And the answer is no. A judge has already halted that. But anyway, there's more to the story, and I'll let Jenny kind of take it away from here.
Take it away. Yeah, so really what we're going to talk about in this lawsuit is what the lawsuit is about. And it is about the school district of Marvell-Elaine, which is two school districts that were previously consolidated into one. So there's some history there with these school districts in the state, a lot of rightfully so, protective feelings of the people of this community over their school district. And the district was rated F. Now there is a new story up this week on the Arkansas Advocate, and I would encourage everyone to go read that. And it's about maybe it's time that we update our school rating system because a lot of these schools that receive an F rating are schools that have a high percentage of students that are in poverty. And you have heard us talk about this in the past in the context of Learns, but also just in policy in general, that we need to be accounting for poverty when we score public schools and when we fund our public institutions and create these matrices that determine how much funding they get per student. It's really about the haves and have-nots. And so it's, not for lack of effort on the part of the folks that work and teach in this district in Marvell-Elaine, but it is a bunch of other factors that play into it. So all that to say, they were at risk of losing control of their school. And in the state of Arkansas, the state can basically take over a district, which has happened in many other places, including Little Rock. And so the school was at risk of losing control of their district, either getting ownership by the state or closing. And really what happened is Learns has this third option, which is allowing a charter company to basically take over a public school system. Now, charters are publicly funded private educational entities. And it's really a for-profit model, and it allows, businesses and investors and all kinds of other stakeholders to basically earn income off of a charter model. Now, charters have their place. They are kind of supposed to be these like incubation for innovation and figuring out new models. They're really not supposed to be kind of applied across the board everywhere, but lo and behold, we have this option now where charters can take over public schools in the state of Arkansas under Learns. So when Learns went into effect per the emergency clause, which means that as soon as Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed it into law, it became law of the land, that was an option for Marvell-Elaine School District. And that is ultimately what was decided upon, that the Board of Education decided that the reins would be passed from the district itself to this charter company called, why am I blinking? Friendship Education Foundation, or Friendship Charter. And so that is really at the crux of this lawsuit. The lawsuit is saying that because the emergency clause did not actually receive the proper type of procedural vote, which is two separate votes, it was lumped together as one, and also argued in this lawsuit because Learns is not technically an emergency by constitutional definition, that the emergency clause portion of Learns is moot, that the law won't become law until 90 days post sine die, like everything else. Is it 90 days post sine die?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So it's basically the argument of those filing suit is that this rushed nature of the emergency element is really not actually an emergency, and it's causing harm to the people of the school district. It's causing harm to what's going to happen, the future plans, entering this contract hastily, really not giving residents enough input and time to decide what kind of contract or with whom a contract would most benefit the school district and the students. So it's not a lawsuit that takes issue with the merits of LEARNS as a law in and of itself. It takes issue with the emergency component of it. To the point of the secondary motion that was filed just last week, so this kind of like addendum or an additional motion was filed by the plaintiffs that says, hey, when we say that we need you to rule on the state of the emergency and whether or not it's valid, we mean it, because this is causing harm. And what we found out through this secondary motion is that the state, which is essentially, and Secretary of Education Jacob Oliva, who's kind of operating as like interim superintendent, that he fired all of the staff at Marvell-Elaine. And that was really something to find out about, especially because when LEARNS was in its procedural throes, there was a lot of rhetoric from the governor's office and from other people that these charter contracts would not put any employees at danger of losing their jobs. And the very first thing that happened is that they actually did let all of the staff go. And then basically they were told, if you want to reapply for your job, you can, but you have to do it through friendship charter. So the argument is pretty solid that it's causing harm to these, staffers or former staffers. And what Hannah said, there was a ruling on it, and a judge in, Pulaski County said, yes, this is causing harm and the emergency portion needs to go away. So basically the emergency portion is not in effect. LEARNS will still become law, but the emergency element of it, the judge said, nope, that is not a thing. They didn't do it right. And so we're in this like purgatory status with LEARNS, where it's not effectively law, it will be law, and the state's like trying to do all this stuff and trying to like kind of, take over these districts or set up these charter contracts and
trying to sell our schools.
Sell our schools. Yes. And the rhetoric that, and this is kind of what Hannah and I are going to talk about today, is not necessarily the lawsuit in and of itself, but it's like, it's this coordinated effort on the part of both the executive branch and the Department of Education, this big PR campaign to basically intimidate and scare the plaintiffs into dropping the lawsuit. And it's really gross.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's not ideal.
So no worries if you're like, what is this lawsuit about? Blah. That's kind of like, we don't have to get into the weeds of that, but we do want to talk about this like state sponsored, really, for lack of a better word, propaganda machine.
Yeah.
Running in Marvell-Elaine. It sure is something. Any thoughts on the lawsuit or any of that other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of been hard to keep up with, right? Like all of these different people on Twitter saying the same, it's like cookie cutter, same words, same language. And I mean, like, I'm not giving them props, but like it is a good campaign in a form or fashion, but it's not true. And I think that's, I mean, I think the people who are going to be listening to this probably agree with us on that point. But yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah. And, just as an aside, Hannah and I attended a conference on communication last week, and there were a couple of these breakout sessions on disinformation and misinformation. And, whether intentional or unintentional, I think is what determines if it's disinformation or misinformation. But regardless, when there is a narrative that is being pushed out and it's coming like fast and furious, that is this, it's this Russian propaganda technique called the Firehose of Falsehood. It's basically like, we are going to saturate all of your channels with all of this rhetoric, and we're going to come at you really fast and like activate all of these trolls and these bot accounts.
And it works. And it works.
It works. Yeah, it works. And like, we saw this personally. I saw it when we were, early on during the legislative session, and they had that dude, Corey DeAngelis, come to do like the fund students, not systems, like that whole school choice, like pep rally week that we had. And it was like they would just flood social media, and he came with like thousands of bots. So like, if you tried to interact with any of his content or tried to contradict with facts, like the bots would come for you. And they would just like appear no matter what you said. And it was like very clear that, they had this kind of Firehose of Falsehood technique where they would just like blast you with it, and you would kind of lose all desire or will to eventually engage any further. And so like, it shushed the counter narrative. And it also like flooded people that were maybe malleable to hearing their message, or to changing their minds on school choice. So it's a intentional tactic. Thoughts on that?
I have thoughts. I just have to.
What are your thoughts? Tell us.
I just have to collect them. I feel like the Republican Party especially has done an amazing job at putting out propaganda, and Learns is like, I think that's like the real world. Like, this is what's happening right here in our home state. Not that we haven't seen stuff like that before, but it's so organized and so put together that
yeah, it's the Trump playbook is really
right.
What it is. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's as to be expected from Sarah Sanders, right? But it is kind of wild to see it all play out here, and not just on like a national level. And I don't know, like, it really is wild, and I have been trying to keep up with it all on Twitter.
You can't keep up with the Firehose of Falsehood.
You can't. And that's the whole point, right? Is like, you don't need to like start digging, because every time you open your feed, that's all you're gonna see.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So, and I guess what the state is engaged in Marvell-Elaine, which I'll tell you about here in a second, like, it's not necessarily this big Firehose of Falsehood, like that is an example of, but it is coordinated and it's intentional. And so you have to consider the optics. So here is the state trying to say, we want this contract with these people that we have, we have tapped them. We've tapped Friendship Charter as the people who are going to take over. And there's, who knows why it's Friendship Charter. I was just looking into this like a couple hours ago. There's ties there between their executive officer, their CEO has deep ties with Walton Family Foundation, and one of the people who sits on the charter like board that determines which charters get which contracts in the state, like that, one of those people is a Walton Family Foundation staffer. So there's a lot of ties, and that's not surprising. Like, the Walton Family Foundation has been at the forefront of school choice movement for a long time. They have always funded charters. So like, that's not surprising. There's no like, whoa, what is this? But like, the state has to do some massaging in Marvell-Elaine. Like, again, these folks are fiercely protective of their school district. It's a majority Black school district. And, here comes the people, the majority white people who pass Learns. And so they're having to do some heavy lifting on the front end with the community, which I think that they have done. Whether that's ethical or unethical is who's to say. But then this lawsuit comes around, and now they're like, well, shoot, it's not just countering our message, it's literally suing, taking like legal action. against our message that the transformation contract is good and is saving the school. And that's the rhetoric that they use over and over again. It's like, we are saving, thank God, Marvell-Elaine School District has been saved by LEARNs and its forebearers. And the lawsuit says otherwise. The lawsuit says like, yeah, oof, why'd you fire us then? And so, you know, since then, there has again been this strategic messaging campaign, and it's kind of taken shape in some different ways. So one is like there's the coordinated messaging element, and we'll touch on that in a second. But first and foremost, Friendship had a job fair in Marvell-Elaine before they even received the contract. And that seemed a little presumptuous.
Little
To some.
sketchy.
Okay. I guess they had a good feeling about getting the contract. So there was that element of it. Like, let's get on the ground and meet with people and get FaceTime and do that kind of like face-to-face community lobbying. There's this other element where there was, you know, pushed out opinion pieces in state media. So there was an op-ed that was run in the Democrat Gazette, and more on this in a second, but that was like, oh, this is what's best. The state takeover, or I'm sorry, not state, but the charter contract is what's best. This is saving Marvell-Elaine. I'm this person who's like, I'm from Marvell-Elaine. I'm a teacher. This class erupted with joy when I told them that their school wasn't going to close, and like, yay, yay, yay. And then there's this coordinated messaging element, which is basically like, we're going to push out our message that we're saving the district. And then any kind of counter message, we're going to like flood with that fire hose and go on the attack and basically try to demoralize our opposition. Yep. Any commentary on any of that, Hannah?
I just kind of want to throw out some of the terms that they're using.
Please do.
So activist judges, radical left, an absurd lawsuit or frivolous, zero merit, the radical left, this suit is absurd, utterly silly, dumbest lawsuit. So these are all phrases that have not just been found in, like, for example, Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweets. These are tweets from different people on that side, again, to your point, trying to completely diminish the lawsuit and the whole reason behind it. And that's just one, you know, those are just a couple, but yeah, those are the terms that they're using. I think my favorite is activist judges. You know, or liberal Pulaski County judges. Those are probably my favorite.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because that is like pretty clear that they have coordinated on that, because the judge that actually made the judgment that ruled on the emergency clause status is not a liberal judge. Like they like the plaintiffs could have very easily gotten a very liberal judge in Pulaski County, and they didn't. They drew this judge that is known to be pretty fair, and that's pretty well liked amongst conservative attorneys in the county. Like, I mean, he's not an activist. And there are very clearly activist judges who like to get these types of issues and make a political statement. And this was not that. And so the fact that they started like grinding out that messaging, which is in such a blatant contrast to how this judge operates his court, it was just even more apparent that this was a coordinated messaging effort and not actually like, oh, this lawsuit is frivolous and this ruling is frivolous. It was intentionally like, no matter what happens, this is the line we're going to go with, right? Activist judge, you know, radical left, blah, 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 blah.
These are their note cards.
Yeah. And, you know, and we did see, like, what's really funny is when you like scratch that activist judge surface, there's just like nothing there. And I think not that regular people are going to care or hear other, like, and that's the point, right? Like, that's the point of like the fire hose of falsehood is like, we're going to say activist judge over and over and over and over and over again in the course of 3 days. We're going to pump it out through every lever we have. And to be honest, it's just like the governor's Twitter page the Department of Education's Twitter page, because I think they're one and the same now. And then like the governor's staff on their personal pages where they just like do her bot work for her. And then like a couple of like lobbyist adjacent type people. And they just like, they flood it. And that's kind of their thing. Well, what they have working against them is, one, we know what they're doing, so we're going to say it and we're going to tell people. And two, there's just like not quite enough of them. Like they don't quite have the Corey DeAngelis like level to bring to it, which is funny though, because I did see him starting to kind of like and engage with some of their tweets. And I was like, did they call in the big dogs because they need more reinforcement? And I think
they
probably
phone a friend, like,
yeah, they were like, hey bro, we need some help.
go like my tweet.
Yeah, we gotta get your bots out here, Corey. Because his bots pack a punch. There's just so many of them, so it's more effective. And like there's just not enough of her, like, to use the Arkansas Times' phrase, like her hench people. There's just not, there's like 4 of them. And then like a couple of adjacent people. So like maybe 7 total. And it's just the same 7 kind of disseminating the message, hoping that it's gonna pick up. And not to say that this type of work is most effective on Twitter, because it's really not. This is just like the Politico space where they're like instantly trying to react to it. The hard work is like, how do you convince the people of Marvell-Elaine? And I don't know, maybe they're hoping that like media is going to pick it up and media is going to start using the phrase activist judge, but I doubt that's going to happen. Like the Democrat Gazette does some questionable things sometimes, but I doubt they're going to publish the phrase activist judge. But yeah, it's really interesting to watch in real time. I think like once like you see it, like once you see what Hannah said, like the repeated terminology, the phrase frivolous or frivolity, like you start to see it everywhere and you're like, oh, I get it now. That's what they're trying to do. And it's just it's a tactic. It's a propaganda tactic, really. I mean, it is what it is. And they're hoping that it's just going to like, burp, 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 winter soldier you into their side. So here we are to tell you about it.
Hello.
Deprogram you. We have no programming agenda on this call. We have strict exposed propaganda on our list, and that's it. That's all she wrote. And I think it's clear when we engage in opinion. But yeah, I do think it's important though that like Arkansans are equipped with this knowledge, like that they can start to see these patterns and start to see these tactics for what they are. And I think that's a good segue into what we'll talk about next, which is kind of what happened over Memorial Day weekend.
Is this the op-ed portion?
This is the op-ed portion. Do you want to add anything before we?
No, I just another tactic is omitting the truth purposefully, and that's kind of what Gennie's going to talk about. But yeah, this one's pretty funny, I suppose.
Yeah.
Funny, maybe not in a ha-ha way, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, just kind of surprising yet not. Predictable yet unpredictable. I don't know. Yeah. It's upsetting, but like not shocking, I guess.
Right.
At this most the state of Arkansas politics. So this op-ed we talked about where the person said they were from Marvell-Elaine and they like, I love this community, blah, 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 Learns saved it. This is why Learns is amazing. Learns. It's an ode to Learns, and it's an ode to this transformation contract between Marvell-Elaine School District and Friendship Charter. And it's very much framed as like, this person saying, I'm an educator, like I've lived and grown up in the Delta. This is my home. These are my people, blah, 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 blah. And I got to tell the 2nd grade class that their school wasn't going to close. And they like erupted with like celebratory praise and tears of joy. And it was very emotive. It was appealing to people's emotions, right? It's like, oh, I'm picturing this class full of 7-year-olds and they're cheering, and this teacher up there telling his class that they're going to be saved and they're not going to get shut down. And it's like, oh, that's so heartwarming. And like the guy's Twitter profile page, like the background is like him in this class. And to be, just to like give everybody a heads up to paint the picture, he is a young white man, looks like he might be in his 20s. And then like this picture on his profile is like, you know, what appears to be maybe one would assume this second grade class. And it's a bunch of little cute Black 7-8-year-olds. And they're all smiling. And so that's it. And so he writes this op-ed and like the governor is pushing it, Department of Ed's pushing it, everybody, those 7 people are retweeting it ad nauseum. And then over the weekend, a friend was like, hey, do you know this guy doesn't even teach at Marvell-Elaine? And I was like, what? No, like the guy who wrote the op-ed, like, yeah, he says it. And then, you know, it was like back and forth. And then, you know, one Google search and it was like, oh, he teaches not in Marvell-Elaine School District, but he's a teacher at Marvell Academy. Do some more Googling. Oh, Marvell Academy was the very first segregationist private school in Marvell in 1966. That was born out of a movement for white parents to be able to keep their kids away from Black kids during integration. Their founders were white supremacists and part of this thing called the Citizens Council, which is like the civic branch of the KKK. Like they're not KKK affiliated, but basically that's what it is. It's like white supremacy and civic action is basically what this council was. And there is a Time article, the publication Time did an article on it in the 60s. You can Google it. We have it linked in one of our comments on Twitter, but like it talks about the impetus of this academy being founded. And it's like, wait a sec, but this guy is writing this op-ed about how he helped, like how this helped save Marvell-Elaine and the kids erupted. And it was like, is he pretending to be a teacher there when he's not? Like, what is this about? And so automatically it was like, okay, well, we've got to talk about this. So we did a couple of pieces on Our Watch. One is about like the overall PR campaign. And then the other one is about this person in particular who does not in fact teach at Marvell-Elaine School District, but teaches at Marvell Academy, which is predominantly white. And so we published it. And, you know, what we thought would happen did happen, which was a lot of anger from his side and from his end, which is like, how dare you say that I said I was a teacher there, because I never said that. And then that was kind of how, that was like the tug. And then it just started to kind of unfurl from there. Because what we were doing was pointing out, and he's right, he never said that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was intentionally misleading. And you talked about omitting things on purpose, intentionally being vague, intentionally leaving out key components of context so that your audience will formulate a particular opinion or have a particular reaction. Because if he would have led that op-ed by saying, you know what, I'm a Marvell-Elaine resident, but I teach at Marvell Academy, which is predominantly white and rooted in segregationist history. But I'm a JP, so I represent Marvell-Elaine School District, and I think this is good for the school. And I visited the school, and I happened to go in to talk to a class of 7-year-olds, and I told them, and they were excited. And then I took a picture and put it on my Twitter, even though those are not my students. It doesn't have the same impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
As lies by omission, by saying, you know, by letting the reader interpret it as they will. And then they get to deflect when you call them out, right? That's another tactic of propaganda. Like you get to deflect and say, like, I didn't say that. How dare you? I care about this community. When all of the truth and all of the facts actually paint a completely different picture than what the editorial said. Do you have thoughts on that, Hannah?
I mean, it's just wild, firstly. Secondly, like I just can't get over this man going to the public school and being like, hello, children, you're saved.
I'm
Like,
your life savior.
you've been saved. That's, I mean, why did I'm just like having a hard time processing all of it. And like, the
It is
thought,
an interesting tactic, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, and I'm also just like, why did, I mean, not to put blame on like the public school, but like, I'm trying to figure out how he got in to like speak.
Oh, well, so he is a JP, and that adds another
Oh,
element
that's
to the
right.
story.
That's right. I forgot about that
Yeah, so
aspect.
he's a justice of
Yeah,
the peace,
a
Mhm.
county official.
An elected county official.
The
Yes.
county official.
And I think has been at the forefront of like, he's part of the Young Republicans of Arkansas.
Mhm.
Like he worked for, who's the congressman that, is it Crawford?
Oh, he was
He
from
worked for Crawford at
Northeast
some point in time.
Arkansas.
Yeah.
Oh
And
wait, he is in Northeast. Sorry, my
yeah, he's
brain
in
is
like that.
a wild. Yeah, that's not great.
Well, he's very political and has
Yeah.
been like at the forefront of this argument for Marvell-Elaine,
Mm-hmm.
like for some kind of contractual obligation, either with the state prior to Learns or subsequently with a charter. Like he knows about it because he's a JP, but has been advocating from the beginning for some
Right.
kind of control, like contractual control as a solution. So
I mean, yeah, just like another abuse of power example too. Just like I'm a JP, so I'm gonna go talk to these students who aren't mine
yeah,
and
yeah.
tell them so that they tell their parents, you know? Like this man told us our school was safe today. It's all thanks to Learns.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of gross. Like that's really
It's
gross.
very
It's
gross.
really
In
gross.
fact,
Like
we
we
say
want to
it's
talk about
slimy.
in yeah, anyway, it's so gross. That's what I have to say, I suppose. Anyway, I love that we called him out and that he got mad about it.
Well, I mean, it's one of two things, right? Either they were hoping that no one would connect the dots,
Mm-hmm.
or they were anticipating that people would connect the dots, and then they could use this kind of like, omission defense, this like
Right.
affirmative omission defense, where I was like, whoa, I never said that. Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
But it was clearly the narrative was clearly crafted to lead readers into assuming.
Yeah. And I want to say here too, and I don't think you mentioned this while we were recording, but we kind of talked about it before we started recording about how like that op-ed was not for the Marvell-Elaine School District. Like I think you said this before too. People in that community know who he is. And they know, like, if they were to read that, they would automatically know that he is not a teacher at the public school. This was an op-ed for the rest of the state to get those butterfly feelings like, oh, we're saving schools, la da 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 da. When like the actual community is like, I don't know. I don't know. Our teachers just got fired.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it's to shore up state support for this move, while simultaneously they are strong arming people in that district. And we even heard reports of like, and I haven't been able to like find it or corroborate it yet, but like heard kind of like, well, Oliva has used these talking points like if they don't enter into this contract, like the state is just going to have to take over or we're going to have to close. But like the lawsuit, the judge's ruling protects that from happening. It protects that from happening. There is language written into it that says like the state can't retaliate because it's mad. Which like talk about abuse of power. Like they're really going around like threatening members of the community by saying like, if you don't drop this lawsuit and this contract doesn't go through, like who knows what would happen. And it's just an echo of what we heard all during legislative session with in regards to Learns, with lawmakers being threatened, like if you don't get on the train and support it, we'll just have to primary you, or if you don't vote yes, straight across the board on Learns and everything else the governor wants, then like, I don't know what's going to happen to your district funding. Like, oh,
Good
it's,
luck.
it's like, that's coercion. That's blackmail. That's,
Oh.
I mean, I don't think it's legal. It's definitely not ethical. It might be legal. I don't know. Like, it's really bad. It's really bad. And it's communicating like loyalty and fidelity above all else. Fall in line, or pay the price, or get wrecked, right?
Right.
Drop the lawsuit, Marvell-Elaine, or get wrecked is the message. And that is the state of our state right now. Those are the people in power.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're gonna want me to cut this out, but anyway.
That's always a good start.
Well, there's word that something similar is gonna happen in Earl, Arkansas.
Yeah, no, you should absolutely talk about that.
Yeah, and for context too, Earl, Arkansas just elected the youngest mayor, I think, in the nation, right?
Yeah,
Right? Yeah, he's like 18. And it's again like a predominantly Black community, and the state is trying to take over the school. Or it's trying to, what is the phrasing? It's like leave state control to then,
yeah, I'll pull it up.
yeah, it's like some tricky wording there.
So yeah, so remember, like, this is what we've been talking about, is we're in this weird purgatory now with Learns, since this judge's ruling is like, okay, emergency order is not in effect. The state has appealed it. They did that today. So this is now an emergency Department of Education board meeting that's going to happen Thursday, June 1, at 10:30. Sorry if you can hear my son sneezing. At 10:30 a.m. at the Earl Elementary School auditorium. The language says, this is a press release from the Department of Ed. The board will consider the recommendation to remove the Earl School District from fiscal distress status and assume authority of the district classified in need of level 5 intensive support. The board will also consider education service cooperation evaluations. So they can't come out and say, hey, we're going to consider charter contract management, because that's not technically allowed right now because Learns is not into effect. So they can use the good old state takeover language, but they can't use the Learns language. And so this is like this weird towing of the line.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're going to consider maybe these future possibilities. But this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And it's gonna be our rural schools that get hit first, as
It
we're
is
seeing, like
our
one after another.
rural schools. Yep. Our Delta schools, our schools with decades of neglect from this state.
Mm-hmm.
And they have, those in support of Learns have the audacity to then say that Learns is saving these schools. And I want to point out that this is another one of these propaganda elements, is like the rhetoric behind Learns is that it is the biggest investment in public schools ever, that this is a public school bill. It's a public school law. That is what proponents say. Learns is below what the Joint Education Committee adequacy study recommended the state make their investment in for public education. It is below it. They didn't even meet the adequacy study recommendation for how much the state needs to invest going forward. So one could just imagine that if this was not a political agenda of Sarah Sanders and her administration, and Learns was not on the table, that per the adequacy study recommendation, which, just to cut through that legalese, like that just means the education committees get together and they kind of review these like best practices, and they review data, and they get all this input from stakeholders across the state, including school districts and the budget office and all these people, and they make a recommendation for the next legislature. They go, here's what we learned. Here's kind of what we see coming down the pike. Here's the money we have right now. And this is how we think you should allocate it based on all of this information we have. And it's a really cool thing. It's a cool best practice that they have, that they do this adequacy study. And it's not sign in blood. Like, it's the new legislature that's coming up in 2020, help 2025.
2024.
2024?
Well,
No, 2025.
yeah, sorry. I was thinking election year.
No, that seems so far away, but it's not. The 95th General Assembly. We just finished the 94th. So the 95th General Assembly, whenever that happens, sometime, they can look at this report and go like, oh, this is a great starting point. We know that we need X amount of dollars here, this type of thing here. We need to beef up special education. We need to, so like, it's like a standard. It's like a jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't go below the adequacy study. You're not like, yeah, we're just going to undershoot that. Like, you said X amount of investment. We're just going to go way below it. And then we're going to say it's the largest investment ever. So that's like another one of those tactics, is like not telling the whole truth, not giving context.
Well, I mean, that's a straight up lie. Like, it's not just not telling the truth. I mean,
and I see what they're doing. I see the mental gymnastics, right? And they're going, well, nobody has spent this much money yet, so it's the biggest. And it's like, okay, but it's still less than what the state actually needs just to function, just to keep its public education institutions going.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like, it's all part of this, like, fall in line. We're going to repeat these words. We're going to say save and learns a bunch of times. Learn saves, learn saves, learn saves. And then we're going to say radical judge, radical judge, radical judge.
Yeah.
Or activist judge, radical left, whatever it is, frivolous lawsuit. And then they're just like, let's see what sticks on the wall. And we're going to run with that.
So I have a question, and this might not be a part of the video, but this is just for my own brain.
Maybe we should include it. I love a question.
So, okay, let's say, well, we know Learned is going to go into effect regardless, right? Learned goes into effect. We're talking about Elaine Marvell School District. They get taken over by charter school. Are the kids in that community now, are they, like, I understand that we have the voucher program, right? So each student gets X amount of money, but what's to stop the charter school from having a higher tuition than what, like, the voucher is?
So they don't charge, they don't charge tuition.
Okay. I feel like I don't necessarily understand. Like, I know what charter schools are, but the funding aspect is kind of out of my.
I'm assuming the funding stays within the district, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure how that happened. Like, I guess we'll have to see, because it hasn't ever happened before. Like, there's never been a charter take over a public school. There's been like charters take over like private schools and other charters. So we'll have to see how they do that. But like, from my understanding, how charters make money is not from the pupil, but from like all the other contracts that come and all the other funding that comes with, well, like, it's not a tuition model, but like, they still get to make all of the money to pay all of their people. So like, the admin side is really heavily weighted. And they tend to like make their money with like services and consultations and these like go-betweens between the company and the state. And so because that is a for-profit model, even though, and you'll like, if you dig into it, like the Friendship Education Foundation, I don't know why that's so hard for me to remember, but that one is a nonprofit. Like that's like a 501c3 or whatever. So they're not generating any revenue.
Mhm.
But then there's like Friendship Charter Inc. And like they are generating revenue. And they're like all integrated. And so you have like, oh, we're just like turning it over to this nonprofit. See, it's like wholesome. But then there's like all of this,
Okay.
you
I
know,
see. I see.
for-profit entities that come with it, and they are able to generate revenue and make money off of these contracts. It's pretty complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds complicated. I was just like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was like, wow, are these kids or are these families gonna have to like spend money on tuition?
I don't
I
know. Now,
don't.
I do know that but I do know that charters a lot of times will do things like uniforms.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
other aspect because like
and like you do have to pay for that. Like like
yeah, and
that's
that
out of
can
pocket expenses for
and it
family.
can get really expensive. I know like when I went to a private school when I was in like kindergarten to third or fourth grade, and like we, specifically every Wednesday we had to wear like this very specific button down shirt, and like the shirt by itself was $50 back then.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine like what that cost is. And it's not like you have a kid and we're talking about younger kids, like they grow throughout the year. It's not
No, it's a thing. Yeah, I mean, my partner's kids go to a charter school and they wear uniforms, and they also have this really interesting thing that I take issue with, and I've talked to him about before. And I mean, like he's like, yeah, it's weird. They have this thing called cash for casual on Fridays, where you can pay money to the school in order to wear your casual clothes
no, they
on Friday.
don't.
Yeah, and I'm like, that is not equitable. Like, what is this? And then I'm like, where does the money go? Which is not like they're generating like millions of dollars off of these, elementary age kids for their buck or whatever. But I do think like that's also problematic, right?
What
Like,
kind of life lesson is that? Like,
I'm like, that is some private school crap if I've ever heard it. Like, that is not
that's
fitting of a charter.
wild.
Yeah, like I don't love that. Like that's gross. But yeah, I think you're right, Hannah. Like there are other considerations for charters because they can run it however they want. They can say like, oh, we now have this dress code policy. You've got to comply. And if you don't, and
See
I
ya.
think that is a big question is like, well, no, they can't do that. That's only
Well, I
private
know.
schools. I think you've got. But that's a big question is like, what happens if they implement certain things and then like, kids in the district can't comply with, or families can't. I don't
Mhm.
know. I guess we have to wait and see because it's never happened before.
God, lots of questions still, because no one answered the questions when they should have been answered during the
Right.
legislative session.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the crux of it, right? Is like, this is why we don't rush these types of things is because
Mm-hmm.
our kids are worth it. Like our kids are worth creative, collaborative problem solving. And I also want to say, I'm going to get on another soapbox really quick.
Let's
Quick.
do it.
Is that this is not a partisan issue. Like this is wanting to adequately fund our public institutions and wanting to do right by schools that have been historically neglected and marginalized and communities that have been historically oppressed and intentionally left out. Like that is not a partisan issue. That is a bipartisan issue. We saw that with Learns and the opposition. I mean, they were few and far between, but there were Republicans in opposition to Learns, and we commend those Republicans. We commend any type of creative, collaborative problem solving that makes education in our state more equitable. I think about Representative Wooten's bills that would have required private schools receiving vouchers to provide transportation for students on those vouchers. That would require them to accept those students who've applied for vouchers. That is true equity. That is true choice. That is true empowerment. It is not this hollow rhetoric about saving schools, which is like the privilege and the that rhetoric is just, like, we haven't even talked about this really. Like, we said it was gross, but like, that is so problematic. Like, Marvell-Elaine does not need the white folks in Little Rock to save them. They need adequate funding and adequate investment from the state. That is what they need. They need to be empowered and to have the tools and the resources that they need to execute what is best for their community. Like, if we believe in local control, we need to give them local control, and we need to come up with better, more creative ways to fund these districts. Like, they are struggling. They are struggling, and it is not because of anything they have done. Not because their staff is less than, it's not because their students are less than, it is because they do not have the same opportunity and the same resources as other parts of this state. That is an Arkansas problem. It's not a Democrat problem. It's not a Republican problem. It's an Arkansas problem. Like, it's not like anybody was solving this problem 50 years ago too. And I recognize that. Like, I recognize that everybody that's been in power prior to the people in power now has not done right by these districts. And now we're in a crisis because of it. And it's like, these kids and these community members deserve the best from our state leaders. They do not deserve political games. And that's it. That's my soapbox. I'm gonna get out now.
I mean, do you have anything else to add? Because I feel like that's a good stopping point.
No, I probably do, but like, you can just email me if you got it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Oh gosh. And like, if, you know, this is an appeal, and I mean, we get that there's a lot happening in Marvell-Elaine, but if there's somebody from that community that wants to join us and to like be a voice, we want to elevate your voice. We don't want to assume that I recognize that I just assumed what was best for the school district. They would be empowered, but like, that's a pretty good hunch. I feel like, is like asking them what they need. But yeah, if somebody is from that area and they want to join us and give us their perspective, we would love to amplify that. Yeah. Oh man, there's nothing that gets me fired up like Learns. Someone insulted my college preparatory private school education on Twitter this week. And they were like, another failed public school student. And I was like, bro, I went to one of those private schools. No, joke's on you. Wow, so much to unpack. I also attended public school. I've done both.
Same.
And I have nothing against school choice. I have nothing against charters. All I have a problem with is public dollars going to those institutions.
Also propaganda.
That too. Yeah, I have a problem with propaganda. That is, that's true.
All right, everyone, we're kind of trailing off again. So I'm going to say goodbye and we'll see you next time. Have a good evening or day, whatever.
Keeping us on course, Hannah.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching and or listening. Again, we are 4AR people, and we're here to connect the dots for everyday Arkansans so that they can see how policy affects their everyday lives. Head over to our website, 4arpeople.org, to sign up for our newsletter. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel or our podcast. Thanks again. See you next time.